Vivid verses.
The probability of a marriage maintaining its structural integrity over a 6-year period is approximately 62% within our specific socioeconomic bracket. I had integrated this statistic into my mental model long before I proposed to Sif. At the time, our alignment appeared optimal. Shared fiscal objectives, complementary professional trajectories, and a mutual preference for structured, low-variance social interactions. I viewed our union as a high-functioning system, a partnership built on mutual investment and predictable returns. I did not account for the gradual introduction of a corruptive variable like Thorgils, nor did I anticipate that Sif would be the one to deliberately bypass the security protocols of our private life. The dinner was intended to mark our 6th year of legal domestic partnership. Sif had been uncharacteristically insistent about the event for exactly 21 days. In my internal logs, I noted a shift in her baseline behavior starting 3 weeks prior. She became obsessively focused on the aesthetics of our apartment, a space I had designed for sensory clarity and minimalist function. She introduced variables that served no ergonomic purpose. Heavy charcoal silk runners for the basalt dining table, hand-blown glassware that felt fragile in the hand, and a specific vintage of Bordeaux that retailed for nearly $1,000 a bottle. I observed these adjustments with a clinical curiosity. My initial hypothesis was that she was experiencing a surge in professional anxiety at the museum and was overcompensating by attempting to exert total control over our domestic environment. "It needs to be precise, Viggo," she had said, her voice strained as she adjusted the lighting to a warmer, less efficient Kelvin. "We need to project a specific image of stability tonight. People are talking." The word project was the first significant indicator of system failure. Stability is a state of being. It does not require projection. If one must project it, it is likely because the underlying structure is already compromised. I analyzed her micro-expressions, the 3mm tremor in her left hand as she polished a silver fork, the way her pupils dilated when she checked her encrypted messaging app. I deduced that the dinner was not a celebration, but a stage. I simply hadn't realized yet that I was the only participant who hadn't been given the script. The guests arrived at 19:30. Brander, my brother, was the first. He is a structural engineer with a high situational awareness. He observed the room, met my eyes, and offered a singular, curt nod. He sensed the atmospheric tension. Then came Ides and her husband, followed by Torsten. The final guest was the anomaly that forced a total reevaluation of the entire evening's data set, Thorgils. When Sif introduced him, I accessed his profile in my memory. Thorgils, an architect who specialized in organic forms, a direct ideological opposite to my own rigid systems architecture. He had been Sif's primary romantic partner for 36 months before our encounter. I noted his physical presence, a bespoke suit, a high-end timepiece, and a posture that signaled high-status aggression. A mutual friend suggested he join us, Sif said, her vocal pitch rising, a physiological sign of deceptive stress. "He's consulting on the new wing of the museum." It seemed like a logical, professional overlap. I processed the input. My internal heuristic for social deception flagged several points. First, the mutual friend remained unnamed. Second, the invitation of an ex-partner to an intimate anniversary dinner is a social non sequitur. I inclined my head, my expression a mask of polite neutrality. "The museum wing requires a complex load-bearing solution for the cantilevered roof," I said. "I look forward to hearing how your organic approach handles the physics of a 20-ton overhang." I watched Thorgils smirk. It was a visual marker of perceived dominance. He viewed my technical inquiry as a sign of narrow-mindedness. I recorded his reaction as a data point and moved to the kitchen to finalize the service of the venison. The first 90 minutes were an exercise in social simulation. I maintained my frame, directing the flow of information toward market volatility and the impact of automation on urban design. I noticed Sif was consuming her Bordeaux at a rate that would likely impair her judgment within the hour. Thorgil sat directly across from her, and I observed the subtle mirror imaging of their gestures, a primal sign of rapport. My internal processor flagged this as a level 2 breach. Every time she laughed, she tilted her head toward him, not me. Every time he spoke, she leaned forward, decreasing the physical distance between them by a measured 10 centimeters. The escalation occurred during the final course. Ides, whose blood alcohol level I estimated at 0.09%, leaned back and gestured towards Sif and Thorgil's. "The chemistry hasn't degraded at all," Ides said, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the city outside. She looked at me with a mix of pity and provocation. "Viggo, you're a genius with numbers, but Sif's the real strategist here. She told us last week at the club that if your operating system ever crashes, she's already got the backup husband ready to tag in. It's brilliant risk management." Thorgil's is practically on retainer. The table went silent. I felt the physical shift in the room's pressure. The ambient noise of the air filtration system seemed to grow louder. I did not feel hurt, as that would be an unproductive emotional response. Instead, my mind entered a high-frequency analysis state. Observation A. Sif has discussed my replacement with our social circle. Observation B. Ides feels comfortable enough to broadcast this in my presence, suggesting it is an established joke. Observation C. Sif is not correcting the record. She is smiling. I looked at Sif. She was laughing. It wasn't a nervous deflection. It was a genuine, resonant sound of validation. She glanced at Thorgil's, and for a 3-second window, I saw the true state of our union. I was the primary server, stable, reliable, paying the bills, but Thorgil's was the hot standby, the backup she kept in the wings for emotional stimulation. "It's just good planning, Viggo," Sif said, her eyes bright with a defiance I hadn't seen before. "In your world, everything has a redundancy. Why shouldn't I have a contingency plan for my life? You're so focused on the architecture, you forgot to live in the house." Thorgil's smirk reached its peak. He believed he had won. He expected me to react with a display of territorial aggression, to shout, to argue, to play the role of the wounded husband. That would have validated Sif's narrative that I was rigid and difficult, justifying her betrayal. I did not provide the expected output. I stood up slowly. I picked up my wine glass, observed the legs of the wine, and took a measured sip. I set the glass down. My heartbeat remained a steady 64 beats per minute. Logic dictates that a contingency plan is only valuable if it is superior to the primary system, I said. My voice was low and entirely devoid of anger. I reached into my pocket and felt the weight of my wedding band. It had been on my finger for 2,190 days. It was an 80-gram symbol of a contract that had been fundamentally breached. I walked around the table. The guests were frozen in a state of high arousal shock. I stopped behind Thorgil's. I could see the pulse in his carotid artery. He was experiencing a flight or fight response, likely surprised by my lack of volume. I reached over his shoulder and placed the ring on the table next to his plate. It made a sharp, metallic sound against the basalt. "The redundancy is now active," I stated. "Sif, your contingency plan has been promoted to primary. I am off-boarding from this partnership effective immediately." I turned to the room. The venison was prepared to exactly 54 degrees Celsius. "I suggest you consume it before the fat begins to solidify. Brander, I will be at the mountain cabin." I walked out. I did not wait for the inevitable Viggo wait. or the gaslighting attempt that would claim I was overreacting. I went to the foyer, put on my wool coat, took the keys to the SUV, and exited. I had calculated the cost of staying, the endless arguments, the erosion of self-worth, and found it to be infinite. Leaving was the only rational move. The drive to the mountains took 2 hours. The rhythm of the engine and the white noise of the wind provided the perfect environment for a post-mortem of the marriage. I reviewed the last 6 months of data with a new filter. February. Sif's gym membership changed to a location 40 kilometers from our home, near Thorgil's firm. Probability of a better trainer being the reason, 14%. March. She began encrypted communication with a contact labeled T Architect. I had assumed it was professional networking. It was actually a shadow OS running parallel to our marriage. April. A $4,000 withdrawal from our joint account for educational materials. I deduced now that this was likely a gift for Thorgils. I reached the cabin at midnight. Brander arrived 45 minutes later. He entered, went to the cellar, and returned with 2 glasses of peat malt. He didn't ask how I felt. He knew that was the wrong question. "You didn't raise your voice," Brander said, sitting across from me. "Volume does not increase the validity of an argument," I replied. The breach was total. A shouted response would have been an inefficient use of oxygen. I simply accepted the new data and adjusted my position. To stay would be to accept a secondary status. I do not accept secondary status. "She's going to attempt a recovery," Brander warned. "She'll try to gaslight you. She'll say it was a social experiment or a joke you were too mechanical to understand. She'll tell you that your lack of emotion is the reason she looked elsewhere." I have 48 megabytes of her messaging logs, Brander. Her narrative is irrelevant. I am immune to her perception of my coldness because my composure is exactly what allowed me to see the truth. I spent the next week in a state of hyperproductivity. I did not mope. I calculated. I accessed our cloud synced accounts. Sif had always relied on my lack of jealousy as a cloak for her indiscretions. She assumed that because I didn't check her phone for emotional reasons, I wouldn't check it for forensic ones. She was wrong. Trust is a protocol, and when the protocol is broken, the audit begins. I found a roadmap of her infidelity. It wasn't a sudden lapse. It was a planned migration. She had been interviewing her backup for months. Thorgils, May 4th, Viggo is like a high-end appliance, Sif. He works perfectly, but he has no soul. When are you going to switch back to someone who breathes? Sif, May 4th soon. I just need to ensure the asset division is in my favor first. He's so focused on his charts, he doesn't see the house burning down. I'll make him think it was his idea to give me the apartment. Reading her words did not hurt me. It merely reclassified her in my mind from partner to adversary. My logic was clear. She was a bad actor within the system. I contacted Cert, a lawyer known for his clinical, high-speed approach to asset liquidation. "I want the marriage terminated with maximum efficiency," I told him. "I am prepared to concede the apartment. It is tainted with poor data. I want the intellectual property of my firm and the coastal property in my name only. She can have the liquid cash in the joint account. It is a small price for a clean exit. She's going to demand alimony," Viggo, Cert said. "Point her toward the miscellaneous folder I just uploaded to the server," I said. "It contains evidence of her using joint funds to pay Thorgil's personal debts and consulting fees that don't exist. If she pushes for alimony, I will file for criminal embezzlement. She will settle." 10 days after the dinner, Sif realized I wasn't coming back to negotiate my feelings. The messages shifted from performative grief to cold manipulation. "Sif, 9/12. You walked out on 6 years because of a joke at a dinner party. You're proving everything everyone says about you. You're not human, Viggo. A real man would have fought for his wife." I studied the message. It was a standard shaming tactic. She was attempting to define manhood as a willingness to tolerate her infidelity. My frame remained unshaken. A real man, in my estimation, is one who maintains his integrity and refuses to participate in a lie. I replied, "Direct all further communication to CERT. I have the logs of your conversations from May 4th. The fight is over because the contract has already been voided by your actions." We met one final time at a neutral cafe. Sif looked physically degraded. Her hair was unkempt, and her eyes lacked their usual sharp intelligence. She was wearing a dress I had bought her, a psychological anchor designed to trigger my nostalgia. I noted the tactic and dismissed it. "Viggo," she said, her voice trembling. "I was just lonely. You're always in your head." Thorgils was just... He was there. It didn't mean anything. I was just testing to see if you still cared enough to be jealous. It meant exactly $15,000 in consulting fees and a 6-month timeline of deception, I said. I sat with my back straight, my hands folded on the table. I was entirely immune to the tears now forming in her eyes. Loneliness is a state of mind. Betrayal is a series of actions. You chose the latter. You didn't want me to see you, Sif. You wanted me to fund the lifestyle while he provided the entertainment. You weren't testing me. You were hedging your bets. "I made a mistake," she cried. "A mistake is a miscalculation in a spreadsheet," I said. "This was a strategy. You attempted to maintain me as a safe asset while speculating on a risky one. You lost the hedge. Now you lose the asset. Sign the papers." She realized then that her beauty, her tears, and our history carried zero weight in this negotiation. I had closed the file. My frame was absolute. She signed the papers, her hand shaking so much the ink feathered on the page. The next 6 months were a masterclass in reconstruction. I moved to a high-tech studio overlooking the harbor. I optimized my sleep cycles, my caloric intake, and my training. I found that my cognitive clarity increased by 30% once the SIF variable was removed from my daily processing load. I was no longer allocating mental resources to wonder why she was home late or why she was distant. I threw myself into the launch of my new software architecture, a system designed to predict market failures before they occurred. I spent my mornings rowing on the frigid water of the bay and my evenings reviewing the telemetry of our cloud servers. It was a period of high-fidelity growth. I felt as though I had purged a latent virus from my operating system. One evening, I ran into Torsten at a professional networking event. He looked uncomfortable, but approached me anyway. "I heard about the final decree," he said. "It was the logical conclusion," I replied. "You should know, Thorgils couldn't handle the primary role. Once you weren't there to provide the stability, the house, and the income, Sif became a burden to him. He was a vacation husband, Viggo. He wasn't built for a production environment. He left her for a younger curator last month. He told someone that she was too much work once the secret was gone." I felt a brief sensation of logical symmetry. It wasn't joy. It was the satisfaction of a predicted outcome coming to fruition. "The backup plan was a prototype that never went into production," I said. "A common failure in organic systems. Without the primary to provide the structure, the backup has nothing to support." Torsten hesitated. "She's not doing well, Viggo. She's working in a small retail gallery. She lost her position at the museum after the audit CERT initiated into her consulting expenses. The consequences of her actions are no longer my concern," I said. I excused myself and went back to my work. I did not feel a need to rescue her. She was a grown adult who had made a series of calculated risks. She had lost. Over the next year, my firm achieved a market valuation of $400 million. I moved into a home of my own design, a fortress of glass and slate built into the side of a cliff. It was a space defined by absolute order, where every line served a purpose. One afternoon, while I was reviewing a series of neural net algorithms, I received a message request on my private terminal. It was from Sif. Viggo, I'm living in a small studio in the north. Every day, I wake up and realize what I threw away. I didn't want a backup plan. I wanted you to fight for me. I wanted to know I mattered enough for you to get angry. I thought that if I pushed you, you'd show me something real. I was so wrong. I'm so sorry. I analyzed the phrasing. I wanted you to fight for me. She still didn't understand. She wanted a performance. She wanted a drama to validate her own internal chaos. She had burned down our life just to see if I would try to save the ashes. To her, love was a theater of conflict, a game of brinksmanship. To me, love was the absence of a need for it. If I have to fight my wife to be my wife, I have already lost. I did not respond with a cutting remark. I did not validate her regret. I simply deleted the thread and blocked the origin point. The time for feedback had passed. The system was no longer accepting inputs from that source. I have since entered a new partnership with Runa, a theoretical physicist. Our relationship is built on a foundation of radical transparency and intellectual parity. We do not have anniversary parties with backup plans and drunk friends. We have quarterly reviews of our shared goals. We do not have shadow protocols. We have absolute data integrity. Last Saturday, Runa and I were sitting on the terrace of my home, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. She was explaining a new model of quantum entanglement while I monitored the launch of our European servers. Viggo, she said, looking at me with a steady, unclouded gaze. I appreciate the way your mind operates. There is no noise with you, only signal. It makes the partnership very efficient. Noise is inefficient, Runa, I said. It obscures the truth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I thought about that dinner party one final time. I realized that walking out of that room with my wedding ring in my pocket and my self-worth intact was the single most intelligent decision I had ever made. I had not lost a marriage. I had gained my own freedom. The silence in that dining room had been the sound of a system resetting. And the peace that followed, that was the sound of a perfect signal. I looked at Runa, then back at my screen. The servers were green. The system was stable. I was no longer an option in someone else's game. I was the protagonist of my own reality. I had found the only redundancy that truly mattered, the unwavering strength of my own frame. I was not a backup husband, and I was no longer a primary husband to a ghost. I was simply Viggo, and for the first time in my life, the data was perfect.
Thanks for listening.